Thanks so much, Garrick. As Garrick mentioned, we're privileged to have Martin Wolf as our guest speaker this evening at the James Chace Lecture Series. Martin is the Associate Editor and Chief Economics Commentator of the Financial Times. He's also a Professor of Economics at the University of Nottingham in the UK. Martin's currently spending a few months in New York, working out of the FT's office here, as well as spending some time at the Council on Foreign Relations, where he's the Distinguished Visiting Fellow in International Economics. His most recent book, Fixing Global Finance, was published in September of last year and will provide the foundation for his comments this evening. In our final presentation of last year, Robert Samuelson of Newsweek discussed some of the economic aspects of globalization, focusing on the great inflation era of a few decades ago. There's actually an in-depth article in the latest edition of Newsweek, adjacent to Robert's article, where there's a profile of the new head of the White House National Economic Council entitled The Re-Education of Larry Summers. And the article discusses how the changing economic conditions require a new approach and some creative thinking. And while the article critiques his personal style, and there are personal elements to it, it also refers to him as, quote, perhaps the brainiest of the best and brightest assembled by Obama. Prior to his nomination by President Obama, Dr. Summers actually had the following comments about fixing global finance. Quote, Martin Wolf is the world's preeminent financial journalist. This book should be read by anyone who cares about the future of the international system, which, given recent events, is anyone who cares about the global economy or their economic future. In light of the trends of the past several months, the list of current challenges, which Dr. Summers alludes to, and the issues that he and each of us now face, have, of course, grown far more extensive. And these factors make tonight's lecture especially timely. The students in Bard's Globalization and International Affairs program who are here tonight have heeded Larry Summers' recommendation and have read this important book, as Garrick mentioned earlier. We're also joined by many in the audience who study these issues in Bard College's main campus as part of the Levin Institute, based in Annandale-on-Hudson, and several of them are here in person, as well as others that are joining us via video link tonight. We're also joined by many others from our community who have worked in the global markets. So I'm certain we'll have a very informed and engaging discussion after Martin's comments. The Chace Lecture Series is also co-sponsored by Foreign Affairs magazine, of which its namesake, James Chace, was the former managing editor. And following Martin's presentation, we're fortunate to have the president of the Levin Institute, Garrick Utley, as the moderator of the Q&A session of tonight's event. From his career as a leading television journalist, Garrick has extensive experience in this capacity, including 3 years as moderator of NBC's Meet the Press. So we're very thankful to the Levin Institute for joining us as a co-sponsor of this evening's event. With that, I will turn it over to Martin.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege and pleasure to be here, not least because I'm giving quite a number of lectures, some connected with the book and some not, in the United States during the 3 months I'm living here with my wife. And this is the only one that requires a 10-minute walk from my office. So I'm really very grateful to you for as Garrick said, location, location, location. This location is perfect. So if I come and do this again in New York, and I plan to, I think we've decided to make this a regular annual event. In fact, we're thinking that prices are moving so attractively here, maybe we could buy a small condominium. But not unfortunately in pounds. That's another issue. I would be happy to come back. Just to tell those who haven't been in the program and therefore not been forced to read my book, that it originated out of lectures that I gave at the School of Advanced International Studies of Johns Hopkins University in Washington 2 years ago. Actually, now it's 3 years ago, I have to say. And at that time, I was invited by Frank Fukuyama to speak in a lecture series which was actually 3 successive lectures of an hour and a half each, which is not my normal sort of stint. So I said, well, I'd like to talk about what's going wrong, in my view, with the global financial system. And so I did, and those lectures then were the basis of this book. What I was concerned with was global macroeconomics, the way the global financial system had worked and how that, in my view, was related to the so-called imbalances, which had become a big topic among international macroeconomists in the early part of this decade, and the concern I had that the trends we were watching in these flows and above all the associated stocks of liabilities and assets were unsustainable and dangerous. That was a theme of the book. I have to admit that what has since happened has vastly exceeded my most pessimistic expectations, because though some of what has happened, particularly the effect of on consumers, housing, things like this, were, I think, reasonably clear to me, the complete implosion of the American and world financial system was not. And it turns out that I was wildly too optimistic. I like to say when I talk about this, I was in reasonably good company. Many of you may not realize that even my friend Nouriel Roubini, who's notorious, of course, for the accuracy of his predictions, and if you look back at what he predicted would happen a year ago, he was far too optimistic. We have wildly exceeded the most pessimistic expectations of any competent professional observer, including myself. I'm not saying that I'm a competent professional observer. The only other point I would make about this book and the theme, why did I get interested in this? I'd previously completed a book in 2003, which was published in 2004, with the rather bold title, Why Globalization Works. And when I finished that book, it became obvious to me that there were 2 big issues that whose implications I hadn't fully explored, and which I planned to explore. One was the global financial system and its repeated failures. I already discussed that in this book, but I hadn't been able to elaborate further. And the second is environmental questions, on which I clearly wrote far too little, but there was a limit. The book was already 50% longer than my publishers wanted, so that was that. They were very kind to publish it anyway. So there's still in my mind a plan to write a much bigger book on global environmental constraints, and was Malthus right? And that may come in 2012, given my normal pace of writing, particularly since I intend to do, for fairly obvious reasons, a second edition of this book. Okay, let's start this subject. I thought this is a nice drawing, just to get you in the right mood for this subject. I found this on the internet, as one does these days. It is, of course, for everyone here will immediately recognize the painting from which this is drawn, Edward Munch's famous picture, The Scream, which I've been privileged to see in the original twice. It's a very great picture. I think captures pretty well the existential situation of human beings. Anyway, late 19th century picture, and of course it is the scream on Wall Street. I don't think I need to elaborate on that. The second thing I'd like to say, which is very relevant to our theme, it's about the emergence of Asia as the central surplus region of the world, the capital surplus region of the world. I don't need to read this text. I think you can all see it. Joe Stiglitz, who of course is based in New York, said it's really very, very strange that so much of Asia saved. First of all, that the Asians save so much. The savings rates, I'll come to that later, are quite extraordinary. And second, that they don't have a functioning financial markets in Asia. Instead, they're sending the capital to the US in particular, to a lesser degree the UK and such.